Good afternoon, everybody. This is Congressman Mike Levin. It's great to be with you again for another virtual town hall. I'm coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Got here on Sunday, and a lot is happening. We're trying to get quite a bit done in the month of September, including another COVID relief bill, along with trying to fund the government. You know, if we don't fund the government by the end of September, we run the risk of another government shutdown. No one wants that. And I'm also working on a comprehensive veterans employment package that'll really hopefully deal with the crisis of veteran homelessness and housing and employment right now during COVID-19. So a lot of that and more going on here in Washington. But I'm grateful that you're joining us here again today. I wanted to take a moment and just address the horrific attack on the two Los Angeles County deputy sheriffs that occurred recently in Compton. It was an atrocious act of violence, absolutely inexcusable, and the perpetrator has to be brought to justice. And Chrissy and I are keeping the deputies and their loved ones in our thoughts, wishing them a full and speedy recovery. And it's also been a time of unprecedented wildfires on the West Coast. The smoke that we've all experienced, certainly throughout the state, even in South Orange County and in northern San Diego County, really apocalyptic looking skies. And my thoughts are just with everybody that's been affected by this, the tens of thousands of families that have had to evacuate, the first responders and the firefighters who have worked so incredibly hard and continue to work so incredibly hard around the clock for what is one of, if not our worst fire season in history. And because of these fires, you know, the air pollution is something I think we all have to be very mindful of. And, you know, it's particularly risky for children and for seniors and for those with pre-existing respiratory conditions. I really encourage you to stay safe, stay healthy. And if you want to see the actual air quality index in your neighborhood, in your zip code, you can go to airnow.gov. That's AIRNOW.gov. That's a website run by the federal EPA. You can enter your zip code. You can see exactly what your air quality index is. But I'm thinking of everybody up and down the West Coast as we deal with these unprecedented wildfires. And it's another stark reminder of why we need to take concrete action to deal with the climate crisis. You know, the extreme weather patterns that we're seeing really are only the beginning. And if we don't do something now to act on climate, these damages to our planet, to our communities will be irreversible. And the science is very clear on this. With that, I want to introduce two amazing guests this week, and it's terrific to see them both. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Harold Kelso and Dr. Kimberly Brower. Mr. Kelso is president of the California State Association of Letter Carriers. And prior to being elected as president in 2017, Harold served as vice president for 12 years and worked in the USPS for 38 years. That's incredible, Harold. How is that even possible? That's amazing.
I asked myself that question.
And you started working there when you were, 10 years old. Right? No.
Yeah, you're too kind.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful that you're here, and obviously we're grateful to everybody on the front lines, our letter carriers, everybody working at the USPS for all their great work. We've got a lot to talk about with regard to the USPS today. And also Dr. Kimberly Brower. Great to see you again, Dr. Brower. She is a professor and infectious disease epidemiologist at University of California at San Diego, which I just saw was named the 8th best public university in the United States. Dr. Brower, great to see you. She has expertise in applying both qualitative and quantitative methods to developing new approaches to public health challenges. So again, welcome Mr. Kelso, and welcome back, Dr. Brower. Great to see you both.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's a difficult time, as we all know. Very sadly, the country is now past 196,000 lives tragically lost due to COVID-19. It's just unthinkable, really a heartbreaking statistic, and we're prayerful and thoughtful for all of the families who have been impacted by this. The United States, as we know, has the most confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the world by far, about 6.6 million and counting, and as I mentioned, 196,000 deaths. California has the most cases of any state in the United States, 768,589, and 14,614 deaths as of earlier this afternoon. San Diego County has confirmed 43,181 cases and 742 deaths, and Orange County has confirmed 51,124 cases and 1,105 deaths. On August 28th, as those watching and listening are probably aware, Governor Newsom introduced something called the Blueprint for a Safer Economy, which revised criteria for loosening and tightening restrictions on activities. Every county in California was assigned one of four colored tiers: purple, red, orange, and yellow, purple being worst, yellow being best. And that's based on the prevalence of COVID-19 and the extent of community spread. The color indicates, among other things, which sectors can operate and at what capacity. As an example, in the purple tier, where the disease is most widespread, restaurants can only operate outdoors. But once a county has moved into the red tier, restaurants can operate with 25% capacity indoors or 100 patrons, whichever is fewer. The tiers rely on two leading health metrics. First is the number of cases per 100,000 residents, and second is the percentage of tests that come back positive. Every Tuesday, the state will update data for the previous week and make corresponding changes to tiers for each county. In order to move into a less restrictive tier, a county must meet that tier's criteria for 2 straight weeks. Conversely, counties that fail to meet the metrics for their current tier for 2 consecutive weeks must move to the next most restrictive tier. The plan also includes what they call an emergency brake, where the state can intervene more immediately for concerning factors like hospitalizations. So what does this mean for us locally? Well, currently Orange County is in the red tier, and San Diego County, unfortunately, is on its way back to the purple tier. It was reported earlier today by the San Diego Union Tribune that a big reason for that was the outbreak among students and others at San Diego State University, which was significant enough to actually send the whole county back into the purple tier. And that means, quite a bit more restrictions for different business types and other relevant restrictions that will need to be imposed. A full list of the different business types and all the different regulations that the state is imposing is available at covid19.ca.gov. Again, covid19.ca.gov. And as I've said, for the last 42 town halls for the last 6 months, let's all follow the guidelines that we know will bring down community spread. It means wearing our masks, social distancing, all the things we know work. You maybe have heard from Dr. Redfield this morning from the CDC, who testified that wearing a mask for right now is really the best tool we have as we wait for that vaccine. He said the vaccine wouldn't be widely available to the American people until the end of Q2 or beginning of Q3 of 2021, but he did note the efficacy of wearing masks is very, very significant. So take it seriously. Prioritize outdoor venues over indoor spaces. Don't touch your face, wash your hands, stay at home whenever you can, and do all the other things that I'm sure Dr. Brower is going to speak to throughout this town hall. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brower for some introductory remarks on COVID-19. And Doctor, since we've seen you last, there has been a lot that has gone on.
That's true. And as you just mentioned, both of our counties are kind of teetering between that red tier and that purple tier and trying to keep our numbers down low enough to be in a situation where we're open enough to have economic activity going. Although these restrictions might seem punitive, they're really important to keep our economy running. So the good thing is that one big difference since I was last on is that our hospital and testing capacity is even stronger than before. And the health department has hired a lot of extra contact tracers. So now 98% of cases are being followed up immediately, and their contacts are being followed up in short time as well. So hopefully we're in a better position than we've been in the past months to respond rapidly and to kind of quell outbreaks as soon as they happen. So unfortunately that big outbreak at SDSU, at least it was picked up early, and now hopefully measures will be taken to prevent further spread. I know that the university is really ramping up testing right now. And just one other thing I wanted to mention before we get started in regards to public health. Representative Levin mentioned air quality right now. So everyone definitely pay attention to that air quality index, and just take it a bit easy when you notice that you have elevated numbers in your area, because those elevated numbers really are putting extra stress on your lungs and heart. You don't want to engage in strenuous activities on those days where you may not even smell smoke or see smoke, but you can still have high number of particulates in the area. So just two things to keep in mind, both COVID and, of course, unfortunately, our fire situation in regards to public health issues right now.
Thank you for that, Dr. Brower. You know, I'm going to continue to do everything I can to spread the accurate information, and the situation around COVID continues to evolve. Obviously, we want to see our counties get into those less restrictive tiers, and we also want everybody to stay safe with the wildfires and the air quality issues. So we're very grateful for those words. As I mentioned, we are working hard on a number of things here in Washington. I'm very hopeful that we're going to get this fifth COVID relief bill. Actually, more hopeful today than when I got here on Sunday, just on the basis of the conversations that I've had with my colleagues. I think there's a great desire to get something across the finish line on a bipartisan basis. And just to reset, we've now passed 4 bipartisan bills to deal with COVID-19 all the way back to the beginning of March, when we got $8 billion for a vaccine. Trump administration only asked for about $1.25 billion of new money for the vaccine, but we pushed and we got the $8 billion. Turned out to be pretty important given everything we've learned. Then in the middle of March, we did the Families First bill, $200 billion for nutrition assistance and emergency sick leave. At the end of March, the CARES Act, $2.2 trillion, and really did a huge amount to stabilize things throughout the first few months after the pandemic. Created the Paycheck Protection Program, the direct financial assistance of up to $1,200, the expanded unemployment insurance of $600 a week, and then money for hospitals and or education, and for state and local, $150 billion for state and local. So many other things in that bill, but much of what was in that bill expired in July, August, and we unfortunately are still dealing with this pandemic. Now is no time to take our foot off the gas. In the middle of May, 4 months ago, now over 4 months ago, we passed something in the House called the HEROES Act. It's a very significant bill, over $3 trillion, 1,800 pages, and it would go a long way towards dealing with the public health crisis and the economic crisis. And specifically, I've said all along, you cannot have a healthy economy unless you have healthy people. So we had to focus on crushing the virus. So the money for testing and treatment, the money for our hospitals, the money for our frontline workers, our heroes. That's why we called it the HEROES Act. Has in there the Heroes Fund. Also has significantly more money for education, both K through 12 and higher education, to really try to help our schools that are dealing with this. And then significant funds for state and local and territorial and tribal governments. And that's so important because we've seen state budgets go from being in surplus to being in massive deficits. In California, we went from a $21 billion surplus to a $54 billion deficit as a direct reflection of COVID. I just saw literally across the wire San Diego lost $300 million in tax revenue from tourism as a result of COVID. I know that our cities in the 49th district are all hurting compared to where they would have been before the pandemic. And I was pleased that all 9 of our mayors in my district, there's 6 Republican mayors, 3 Democratic mayors, they all came together and they said, we need more help. Unfortunately, what happened is now 4 months ago, Mitch McConnell said, let's just take a pause. And then through May, June, July, August, they didn't have their act together. And finally, McConnell introduced something called the HEALS Act, a $1 trillion bill, but he didn't have the votes because of about 15 or 20 very stubborn Republican senators who said they didn't want to do anything to help. And so then the Republican senators worked with McConnell and they created a watered down bill, $650 billion bill that included 2 very significant poison pills, one by Cornyn and one by Cruz. No chance that that bill would pass in the House, and they know that. It was a check the box vote for those Republican senators. It was not a serious bill. So here we are. Now, the good news is this. President of the United States earlier today tweeted out, as he often does, that we need to go big, And that follows the similar sentiments from the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, who's certainly a fiscally conservative person, but understands that we really face no good options right now. We have to deal with this virus. We have to crush this virus, or the impact on our long-term fiscal health will be even worse. So we have no good options here. And the thinking of economists of all ideologies, I've heard conservative economists, I've heard progressive economists, they have said, go big, rates are very low, the cost of borrowing that money is very low, go big and crush the virus. That's what the HEROES Act intended to do. And the latest developments are that the new proposal by a group of about 50 of what they call the Problem Solvers Caucus, that came out yesterday, and that's about a $1.5 trillion proposal. And both Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, Mark Meadows, the Chief of Staff, used to be a colleague of ours here in the House, they've indicated that that's about the number that they'd be willing to agree to. So at the same time, Speaker Pelosi in the House, they have said, we will meet you halfway. We will meet you halfway with regard to the HEROES Act and the Senate bill. That would be $2.2 trillion. So you have $2.2 trillion for the compromise bill that the House would agree to. You have $1.5 trillion, which is what the administration apparently would agree to. It seems to me that we ought to be able to meet up and we ought to be able to get something done. Also, the speaker said yesterday, which was widely reported, we're not leaving at the end of September until we figure this out. And I'm encouraged by all of that. I think it's so critically important that we get something across the finish line to save lives, to save livelihoods. We've got 196,000 people that have tragically lost their lives. It didn't have to be this bad. And we now need to take that action necessary to prevent even more lives lost and even more livelihoods affected. So that's what we're going to do. I want to turn for just 1 second to the status of the United States Postal Service. And that has been very much on my mind for the last several months. It is part of the foundation of our democracy. It is enshrined in the Constitution. It is essential for providing critical services. Millions of Americans depend on the U.S. Postal Service to deliver prescriptions, Social Security benefits, paychecks, tax refunds, and absentee ballots. It boasts a diverse workforce and handles 48% of the world's mail. Also employs nearly 100,000 of our veterans. And unfortunately, you've got now Louis DeJoy, who we've heard in testimony both before the House and the Senate. He is waging a campaign that appears to sabotage the Postal Service with these operational changes that have delayed the delivery of prescriptions, including for many of our veterans that I've heard from in our community. It's threatened the ability of eligible Americans potentially to cast their vote in the upcoming November election, and that's simply unacceptable. In August, last month, we passed the Delivering for America Act, and that's a bill that I co-sponsored, to prohibit the Postal Service from implementing any new changes to operations or to its level of service at the current time. It's about protecting our democracy. It's about protecting lives. And it should not be partisan. It should not be partisan. And I'm glad that some Republicans have joined us to recognize the importance of how the situation has gotten out of control. Back in June, I led a bipartisan letter with 137 of my colleagues from both parties, urging them to pass legislation providing a $25 billion emergency grant to the U.S. Postal Service. And the USPS, to me, represents what is best about our country. And if we don't preserve this critical institution, it will severely impact our veterans, our seniors, our democracy, and our way of life. So with that, I want to turn it over to Harold Kelso from the California Letter Carriers. We're so grateful to him and to his members for their hard work in the face of this pandemic. And then we'll be taking your questions. Harold, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Congressman. Good afternoon. Good evening to you, actually, Congressman. I'm here mainly to allay everybody's fears about the security and the safety of their vote-by-mail ballot. And I want to start by reminding you that every December, the Postal Service handles 2 to 3 billion with a B, Christmas cards. That being said, you'll remember that every December, the Postal Service will give you a date that they ask you to mail the cards by in order to have them delivered by Christmas Eve. Now, when we talk about the vote-by-mail ballots, I want to do the same thing. I want to ask all of you who plan on voting by mail, get that ballot back in the mail by October the 20th. That's a full 2 weeks before Election Day. That mail will be delivered in plenty of time. And the other benefit of mailing so early is if you somehow made some sort of mistake on your ballot, maybe you didn't sign it, maybe your signature doesn't match up, it's been received by your local registrar in plenty of time for them to contact you and allow you time to correct your ballot and make sure your vote is tabulated. We do have a new boss, and it's taken him a while to catch on to the culture of the Postal Service. He doesn't, Mr. DeJoy is not from the Postal Service. He's in the logistics business, trucking business. He knows about making the trucks run on time. And he's tried to make sure that the trucks run on time in the Postal Service. Well, that doesn't help our customers if the trucks run on time, believe it or not, because we're always picking up late pieces of outgoing mail, and the trucks are having to wait at the individual stations in order to get that mail and get it to the processing center. There have been talk about delays in the mail, and since Mr. DeJoy has taken over, there has been about an 8 to 10% delay in the mail. A lot of that can be attributed to COVID. The processing centers are shorthanded because they have people out due to COVID, or maybe they retired, or maybe they were just out on sick leave. So the processing centers are undermanned. So when the processing centers are undermanned, they process the mail and it takes them a little bit longer. That means the mail gets to the individual post offices later. That means that the carriers are waiting in the post office for their mail, and that puts them out on the street later. So they're coming back from the street later with outgoing mail, and if there's no truck waiting for them, that outgoing mail doesn't get processed. So Mr. DeJoy, much to his chagrin, was shown at the congressional hearing that under his new plan, the Postal Service is actually delaying medicine for vets and for other people, for elderly people, for infirm people. And I got to tell you, I'm not worried about vote by mail. I know vote by mail is going to do well, but it upsets me and it upsets everybody I know of that work at the post office that someone's medicine is delayed. Not only is that bad business, I think it's immoral. It's completely unacceptable. So with that, I don't want to take up too much time. I know there's several questions that you have for both Dr. Brower and I, so I'm going to turn it back over to Congressman Levin.
Well, thank you, Harold. Appreciate it very much, and couldn't agree more. I've heard the stories from our veterans in particular who normally get their prescriptions in a few days, and now it's taking a few weeks in some cases, and 330,000 veterans a day get their prescriptions from the USPS, about 80% of all VA prescriptions. So it's, as you said, it's really unacceptable for this to be happening, and we're just going to stay on it and try to get those funds to the USPS and try to reverse these damaging policies of DeJoy. So we've got a bunch of your questions. We're going to get to as many as we can, and we're going to start with one for Dr. Brower. This is from Julie in Vista, and Julie asks, what is the latest on a vaccine? Do you think it will be safe to get the vaccine as soon as it's ready?
Oh, that's a great question, Julie. There's currently 40 vaccines in clinical trials on humans and more than 90 preclinical vaccines that are under study in animals. So we have a lot of possibilities that hopefully some of the top candidates will come to fruition soon. All vaccine candidates in the U.S. go through a series of clinical trials. So phase 1 trials, they're tested for candidate safety. It's usually on less than 100 people. Phase 2 trials where you further assess safety and also check if the vaccine actually works. So does it produce a robust immune response? And generally that's done on several hundred people. And then phase 3 is, we currently have 9 candidates in phase 3. These are these large randomized studies of over 30,000 people. And they're particularly recruiting people who are diverse in regards to age, gender, ethnicity, race. And the importance of these phase 3 trials is that it gives not just further information on efficacy, it also provides information on side effects, even rare side effects. So you may have noticed in the news, like the AstraZeneca trial was recently paused. It just started again, because if they see side effects that seem too severe or that are uncertain, they'll pause the trial. They'll make sure that it's not the vaccine causing it before continuing. And if any of these candidates look like it is the vaccine causing problems, then they may decide to discontinue the trial at all. So the good thing is with this approach of phases of clinical trials, you can be quite confident that with these stringent criteria, anything that goes through these 3 phases has, you can have high confidence that the vaccine is safe. And in fact, even once it's approved, they have what's called a phase 4 trial, where it's basically they continue to monitor adverse events as they're doing widespread scale up of the vaccine. So initially the vaccine will be made available probably to healthcare workers and key populations, and they'll continue to monitor the safety at that point. So unlike, some countries have decided to pass up the phase 3 trial altogether, but I have high confidence because we have this system in place, and despite pushes by politicians to speed up things, as long as those phases are completed, we should have quite high confidence that any vaccine that's approved will be safe for the public.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Brower. And, of course, we did see today, this morning, the administration announced a plan for the free distribution of a vaccine. And also Dr. Redfield in his testimony said that it would be available for some of the most at risk starting around November, December, with widespread availability for the average American sometime in the second quarter or third quarter of next year. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly digest that vaccine plan, but I intend to. I hope it's more, I hope it's better thought out than the testing plans or the lack thereof have been. But nonetheless, I'm encouraged that they're working on it. And again, I'm happy that back in March, at the beginning of March, we had the foresight to provide enough funding for what is now called Operation Warp Speed. Important to remember that the House and Senate actually were the ones that called for that additional funding, which has enabled the development to be accelerated. Question from Carla: what are you doing? She means me. What am I doing to save the Postal Service? Are there other ways to achieve getting the ballots mailed, such as Amazon? Well, I think Amazon largely relies on the U.S. Postal Service, so I'm not sure that that would help. But I do think, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we're taking a number of steps. The letter that I led with 137 of my colleagues to get the $25 billion to help shore up the finances of the USPS to get them through the pandemic. That number didn't just come out of thin air. That number was actually given to us by the Trump administration's own Postal Board of Governors just prior to the appointment of DeJoy as Postmaster General. I believe it was in April that we got that $25 billion number. So we're trying to be responsive to the concerns of the Postal Service that they needed that money to get through the pandemic and to get through the election. Moreover, I think it's important to acknowledge that the systemic financial issues of the Postal Service go back at least until 2007, when President Bush signed a law that effectively capped some of the revenues of USPS, while at the same time obligating USPS to prepay 75 years of pension liability, which is clearly a recipe for disaster. You can even make the case, and I've seen it written and said, that some people behind that initiative actually wanted USPS to fail in order to try to privatize it down the road. I think that as an essential service, as something that is enshrined in our Constitution, we've got to do everything we can to help USPS get through this near-term fiscal issue, but also we've got to work with people on both sides of the aisle to make sure that those long-term finances are in better shape. And that's absolutely what I'm committed to doing. And first things first, though, is we need to get that emergency aid to help them get through the pandemic. Now, one thing I found interesting is that one of the proposals, the $1.5 trillion proposal that I mentioned from this group of lawmakers, included $15 billion for the USPS. The Senate bill included the forgiveness of the $10 billion that we included as a loan in the CARES Act. All that's good. It's good that they're talking about it, but neither is enough to solve the problem. They need the $25 billion that they admitted to back in April. Harold, did you have anything you wanted to add to any of that?
I do.
Please.
You pretty much covered everything. You took my spiel away from me, but that's okay.
Sorry. You do it better though, and I'm sure that you should do it again.
Let me talk to you about the solvency of the Postal Service. Believe it or not, the pandemic has indirectly helped the solvency of the Postal Service because everybody is sheltering at home. So what are they doing? They're ordering everything online. So the parcel business, specifically Amazon, has shot through the roof. So originally the Postal Service was predicted to go out of money by late August of this year. Well, because of the huge jump in revenue due to the parcels, they predict that their projection is maybe they would, without any help, they would go out of business a year from now. The congressman is correct about the $25 billion. That isn't a number that was just snatched out of midair. That's a number that the Postal Board of Governors recommended. And that is just COVID relief, trying to help the Postal Service recover from the business it's lost due to the pandemic. And the congressman is also correct in that the long-term financial health of the Postal Service revolves completely around the pre-funding of future retirees' health benefits. We're talking future retirees 75 years into the future. If you think about it, there's people that aren't even born yet that they want to provide for their retiree health care 75 years from now. No other company, no other enterprise in the United States is asked to bear that burden. So in the long run, for the long-term financial viability of the Postal Service, some sort of reform has to be done to this pre-funding. I've heard suggestions that they do away with the pre-funding completely, or they spread it out like a home loan over 30 to 40 years, because they were supposed to pay it off within a period of 6 years. And since the end of the Bush administration, when the bottom fell out of the economy and first-class mail volume dwindled away to nothing, the Postal Service, they do not have the revenue to make that $6.6 billion payment. So that $6.6 billion payment every year accrues, that's held against them every year. When you see that the Postal Service is in the red, they're in the red because that payment is held against them. You can't make that payment. In actuality, every year they are making a modest operational profit. Carla also had a question about vote by mail. Your ballots are completely safe with the Postal Service. I do want to bring to everyone's attention about a postcard that the Postal Service sent to everybody across the country speaking about vote by mail. Part of that doesn't pertain to us in California in the way we're doing it. The Postal Service was well-intentioned when they sent this out to everybody. But if you have that card, disregard the part about applying for a vote by mail ballot. Your vote by mail ballot is going to be automatically sent to you if you are currently registered to vote. Ballots will start to come out October the 5th. I would suggest, if you haven't received a ballot within the first 10 days of October, go to your registrar's website and you can track your ballot. You can enter your name, your contact information, and they will track your ballot. Some people mistakenly think they're registered when they're not. So you can remedy any problem there. But as I mentioned before, the Postal Service handles billions of cards, Christmas cards in December. At most, there are 180 people in the United States that are registered to vote. And we know not all 180 million are going to vote. So the Postal Service will be able to handle this without much of a problem. And if you really are concerned about mailing it back, you don't necessarily have to mail the ballot back. Each registrar, both in San Diego and in Orange County, has a series of drop boxes throughout the county. It's about 125 of them in San Diego County, around 180 of them throughout Orange County. And believe it or not, after you receive your ballot that first week in October, if you so choose, you can go down in person and vote at the registrar's office. So you don't even need to wait till Election Day.
Thank you, Harold. Really appreciate that overview. Here's one for you, Doctor, from Nick in Oceanside. Are we really making any progress on getting the virus under control locally? It seems like things haven't really changed much in the last couple months.
Oh, that's a good question. I know it can seem like we haven't made much progress because the virus is still around, it's still circulating. And, you know, the news this week with San Diego County possibly backtracking to Tier 1 restrictions is all the more demoralizing. I would say, though, don't get too discouraged. For an infectious disease that would normally increase exponentially, keeping the infection rate fairly steady means that actually a lot of progress and work has gone into preventing infections. Also, it's really normal for an infectious disease to have an exponential increase. That's the easy part. The hard part, it tends to have a really slow decrease in cases over time. So it doesn't mean that we can't do better. Definitely, we need to do better. We need to not only keep up our control measures, but get more people involved in continually wearing masks, being mindful of physical distancing and hygiene. But at the same time, don't get discouraged. A lot of your hard work really is paying off, because we're not seeing these huge exponential rises that we would see if people weren't already doing a lot of work to control the spread.
Thank you for that, Doctor. Here's another one about the USPS. This is from James, who writes, "The USPS is one of our greatest institutions and must be funded. How is it that politics have allowed it to be run by a presidential sycophant who has no interest in helping preserve or rally behind the hardworking employees?" Well, I think that Louis DeJoy has demonstrated that he doesn't have the best interests of the Postal Service in mind. And I was quite concerned to read the reports that he may have bundled contributions illegally and then reimbursed his employees or provide bonuses for his employees at his logistics company, because it seems as though his major qualification was his support for the president, as well as his running XPO Logistics, what became XPO Logistics, which evidently made significant revenue from picking up things that the USPS was unable to do. And so it seemed as though he was conflicted from the start, and he put in place a number of measures that seemingly have undermined the Postal Service's regular operations. Look, I think the appointment of political appointees who represent the interests of a very narrow set of people or the president, rather than the interests of those agencies that they're supposed to lead, I think that's sort of endemic to this administration. And I've seen it throughout different agencies. I've seen it in my work, and it's unfortunate. And certainly that applies to Louis DeJoy. But I think DeJoy may have other concerns with regard to the ongoing investigation. John in San Clemente, and this is for you, Doctor. What's going to happen in the winter when people can't eat outside anymore? Might not be a big problem where we live, but it will be in colder areas of the state and country. Should we expect to see a big spike in cases or another shutdown?
That's a great question. As we know, the risk of spreading coronavirus is really heightened in enclosed spaces. In fact, a recent study showed that those who had a positive COVID test were almost twice as likely to have reported dining in a restaurant than those with a negative test. And they're not even sure if that was like mixing outdoor and indoor dining or not. Outdoors, the benefit is, we have better air circulation. Also, sunlight is a way it has virus killing action, which we won't have if we all go indoors during the winter. So does this mean we're destined for a huge rise in cases when activities move indoors over winter? I think it definitely is going to be a lot more difficult to keep things under control, in part to being indoors, but also pandemic fatigue and the desire to gather, especially over the holidays. So very likely we'll see some spike in cases. The good thing is there's a lot of things we can do to really mitigate the risk. One thing is mask wearing indoors, keeping group sizes small, increasing filtration of indoor air, and really being more vigilant with hygiene in general. And hopefully in the coming months, we'll also have some better testing available, which will put us in a better place as far as decreasing transmission than we were at the start of the pandemic. Finally, I would say in cold weather, I mean, if you really want to socialize with people, go for a brisk walk, get takeout instead of dining in, gather around a bonfire or outside under a heat lamp. Do everything you can to ideally stay outdoors if possible, or when you're indoors, be extra vigilant about all those measures to reduce risk.
Thank you for that, Doctor. I've got one now for you, Harold, from Lee in Vista, who asks, I have heard that sorting machines are not only being removed, but that some are being destroyed. Is that true?
Lee, that's a good question. I have heard the same thing, but I haven't heard about it happening within the state of California. I've heard about it happening in other states. When Mr. DeJoy took office, there was a controversy not only about the sorting machines being decommissioned, but about the blue collection boxes being removed from the street. And he claimed that these were measures that were already put in place before he took his post as Postmaster General. That might be true. The Postal Service is always moving the blue boxes. They do tests on traffic on the blue boxes, and they will move them around and remove them from time to time. On the processing machines, letter mail volume is down because of the pandemic. So it wouldn't be unusual for them to shut off or decommission or even remove some of these machines. What makes everything suspect is the timing of all this and the volume, the amount of boxes that are being removed and the amount of machines that are being removed at one time. It seems Mr. DeJoy wanted to hit the ground running when he took over the Postal Service before maybe just laying back and observing and learning how the culture of the Postal Service works. And it's caused problems. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the new boss on the job who always wants to change everything, and how you have to adapt to the new boss, to him or her, and eventually that boss comes around back to your way of thinking. What is really making us scratch our head was, why would he make these changes going into the busiest part of the year for the Postal Service? Anybody who works at the post office will tell you there's no busier time than election time, notwithstanding the mail-in ballots, but everyone's going to receive dozens of those glossy advertising things that everybody hates. Sorry, Congressman.
No offense taken.
and immediately they will go from election time right into Christmas season. You would have thought that somebody with a little bit more foresight would maybe have waited till after the first of the year, till the heaviest time of the year passed. But Mr. DeJoy has his agenda. He's from logistics, and he wants the trucks to run on time, and he's making sure that the trucks run on time. But I hear a lot of nasty stories that some of those trucks are running on time empty, which is unheard of in the post office.
Wow. Thank you for that. Another thing that I'll mention is that the bill that we passed a few weeks back in the House, the Delivering for America Act, not only did it provide the $25 billion lifeline that we've talked about, but it also put a stop to any of the operational changes for the duration of the year to get through the pandemic. I have had conversations with some of our local USPS officials, and I've been assured that, number one, they're going to be able to process those ballots in accordance with state law, which means postmark, up to election day. Number two, that they're not doing removal of sorting machines outside the ordinary course of business. What they did acknowledge is that they're going to be needing new sorting machines for parcels, that they're shifting away from letters more to parcels, and with that will come necessary changes. But nonetheless, I've been concerned because I've been sent the photos from constituents of different blue collection boxes across the district, seemingly that were very well used, that have been removed. So I continue to have those discussions, and obviously we'll let you know if we learn anything in addition to that. Here's one for Dr. Brower. Should we be extra worried about the flu this year? If we get it, and then if we get COVID, are we at higher risk of dying from it?
Yes, definitely. You're right that the flu and COVID make for a really deadly combination. And in fact, really anything causing stress to your respiratory system, such as the poor air quality we've been seeing of late, is a potentially deadly combination with COVID. the flu comes with it added concerns, such as access to health services, since both COVID and the flu normally would be taxing to our healthcare system, especially the intensive care units. And another tricky thing with flu is that it has a lot of the same early symptoms as COVID. So you might have increased stress with people unsure of which disease they might be infected with, or, you know, the worst case scenario is that you end up getting both infections. So the ray of light that we should all feel very empowered to do right now is to get vaccinated for the flu. So unlike COVID, the flu is a disease for which we have a vaccine. It may not always be completely effective in preventing infections, but even if you do get infected, as long as you've been vaccinated, there's usually cross-reactivity, which means you don't get as bad of a case of the flu as you would normally do if you weren't vaccinated. So I encourage everyone to please get vaccinated. You really should do this every year, but this is the year that you should definitely do it. Another piece of encouraging news is that in the Southern Hemisphere, their flu season was much lower than normal. So likely a lot of the social distancing and masking policies that we're doing to prevent COVID transmission will have a beneficial effect, just like you were seeing in the Southern Hemisphere, where you're just not getting as much transmission of a respiratory infection that you would normally see during winter. So while flu and COVID is a potentially deadly combination, hopefully if people get vaccinated and maintain the same behaviors that they're doing to prevent COVID infection, it actually won't be the worry that it could possibly be.
Thank you for that, Doctor. Tina asks or says, please get the word out about voting. Dropbox information, website information for the voter registrar's office, and details about making sure our vote counts. Well, first off, Tina, this is an official event rather than a campaign event, so I would just encourage everyone to vote, regardless of who you're voting for or what you're voting for. I think it's important that everyone exercises their right to vote. You should, as Harold said, you should start receiving your ballots in early October, and you should try to return them, I believe, as quickly as you can for all the reasons we've discussed. And you should fill them out completely, sign where indicated. And you know, the good thing is in California, we're, I think, in an area, particularly Orange and San Diego counties. I commend both of our registrars. They're both working very hard to ensure that all those who are legally eligible to vote can cast their ballot, and that they don't have to choose between their health and their vote. You've got the drop-off centers, as Harold mentioned. You're going to have the super polling centers in San Diego County that I believe open on Halloween on October 31st, and will remain open through the election day. And just same in Orange County, you're going to have the voting centers that open, I think, on October 30. So plenty of options, and please vote. Harold, anything to add to that?
Yes.
All right.
Tina, let me reassure you, your vote by mail is completely safe and secure. But what I want to stress to all the folks out there who are interested in voting by mail, the Postal Service will do its part, the county registrars will do its part, but the third responsibility lays with the individual voter. When you get your ballot, follow the instructions. Human nature being what it is, we don't always follow the instructions, and sometimes we put off things that we know we shouldn't put off. Follow the instructions, sign the envelope. You do not have to put postage on it. It's completely paid within the state of California. And as I cautioned before, get that ballot in the mail. Try to get it off. Make October 20th your target date. You know, if you forget, if it slips your mind and you're within a week of the election, that's cutting it pretty close. The closer you get to election day, the more you're running the risk of that ballot not getting there in time. So if it's close to election day, I would search out one of the drop boxes. For those of you in San Diego County, you can go to the registrar's website at sdvote.com. SD, San Diego, vote.com. For those of you in Orange County, the site is ocvote.com. It will have a list of all the drop boxes. And also this year in California, as long as your ballot is postmarked by election day, it can take up to 17 days and your vote will be counted. They extended it. It used to be 3 days. If it was postmarked, they would count the vote if it was received up to 3 days. But because of the crush of ballots, they've extended it within the state of California to a full 17 days. So make sure you've got that ballot in the mail. If you're going to vote by mail, get it out there. I think pretty much everybody's decided one way or the other who they want to vote for. I think maybe there's 5% of the electorate who still hasn't decided. But get your ballot. You've got a good 10 days to get it back in the mail, and let us take it from there.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. And Oscar in Solana Beach has one for Dr. Brower. Oscar asks, and boy, is this a good question. What should I say to people who refuse to wear a mask? A lot of people don't seem to believe that it's necessary.
Yes, Oscar, as the CDC director mentioned today, face coverings are really the most powerful public health tool we have right now against COVID, so it makes sense that you'd like to encourage those who refuse to wear them to change their behavior. If everybody wore a mask, we'd be in a much better place. We'd have many lives saved at this point in time. But unfortunately, mask wearing has really become tied to a lot of opinions about one's own risk of disease, individual freedoms, political leanings. And in such a charged atmosphere, I mean, unless you're a store owner enforcing public health policies, it probably isn't helpful to directly confront someone who outright refuses to wear a mask. The main thing is to model good behavior, to make sure masks are available to anyone who doesn't have them, to continue with general education on the benefits of masks, and to encourage physical distance of everyone, but especially with those who aren't wearing masks. Really, for those strongly entrenched in their feelings against masks, I wonder, one thing that might be helpful is to encourage those of the same peer group who may have recently changed their opinions about masks to become vocal advocates for them. So they'll likely have a more effective impact than trying to directly speak to someone refusing to wear a mask, because it's just a tough atmosphere right now in regards to discussing this with some people.
Thank you for that, Doctor. M in Oceanside has another Postal Service question. What will happen to the USPS if the Senate doesn't do anything and they don't get any more money? Will they just close down completely? I'll let Harold take the lead on this one too, but I think it's really about keeping the Postal Service's doors open, and we can't let them go bankrupt. The USPS really is so critical to our country, our democracy. But I think I am encouraged, as I said, though, that both the Senate proposal and the most recent House proposals all include some funds, but we need to get that full $25 billion to the USPS. But Harold, what do you think? If the Senate does nothing, the House does nothing, what happens?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, there's enough unexpected revenue due to the crush of parcels that the Postal Service will be able to continue on at least for another year. But I'm optimistic that there may be some changes in Washington, D.C. after November 3rd. And if we get the correct people in charge, that we may get some relief from the pre-funding. And that's the main sticking point. That's what the Postal Service has had to deal with for the past several years. Actually, this controversy about vote by mail has been a boon to us because it's brought our issues to the forefront. Before, our issues have been pushed aside, kicked down the road, or pushed off into the back burner, and no one was interested in our issues. Now our issues are front and center. I've heard more talk about the Postal Service in the last 3 weeks than I've heard in the last 50 years when they had postal reform back in 1970, literally 50 years. So the Postal Service is solvent right now for the time being. So there's no worries there. But we hope there are some substantial changes in Congress and in the White House next year that would really help us out.
Bridget has a related question. She says, regarding the USPS situation, why isn't anyone questioning Trump on the billions of dollars the post office has to pay the federal government every year, that is to the, quote, future retirement fund? If they did not have to pay into that fund every year, they would be a lot more profitable. This is what Harold and I have been referring to, and you're exactly right, Bridget. In fact, there was a bill I co-sponsored and certainly supported called the USPS Fairness Act. And it passed the House with 309 votes, including 87 Republicans. That's a huge number. And that basically would undo a lot of this. It was a bill that was led by Chairman Peter DeFazio, and it repeals the mandate for the prepayment. It improves USPS services. And unfortunately, we had this enormous bipartisan support. Anytime you get over 300 votes for something in the House, is quite a number. But like so many other bills, Mitch McConnell won't even take it up, which is just so unfortunate. And the other thing I'll mention is to reflect what Harold said before, the pre-funding mandate is entirely unique to USPS. No other federal agency is required to pre-fund retiree health benefits 75 years in advance. The pre-funding mandate has cost an average of $5.4 billion every year since 2007, and it's responsible for more than 90% of USPS losses since then, and 100% of losses since 2013. So you want to fix the Postal Service, the USPS Fairness Act, and again, 87 Republicans, a truly bipartisan bill. Anything to add on the USPS Fairness? Go ahead, Harold.
May I take you back on that? First of all,
please.
Let me compliment you. We've trained you really well, haven't we?
Thank you.
When we were talking about the president and money owed to the Postal Service, I just found out just the other day that the president sent out postcards to everybody across the country 6 months ago about COVID. Do you guys recall getting those postcards? Anyway, postage on those postcards is $28 million.
Wow.
The president is yet to pay that postage. But judging on how he's stiffed his creditors in the past, I'm not sure we can get that money. Maybe Congressman, you can help us out there.
Well, we'll certainly look at that. And I think that the cost of mailing a postcard is 35 cents, but DeJoy seemed not to know that when he was questioned about it. But we'll definitely follow up on that. Georgia in Vista has one for you, Dr. Brower. Georgia asks, I heard there may be long-term health effects from COVID, even if you've never had any symptoms. Is that true?
Yes, Georgia, unfortunately, you're right. There can be negative health effects from COVID, even if you've never had any symptoms. So we don't know yet how long-term these negative effects are, and the hope is that they're reversible. So they found asymptomatic cases that were found through contact tracing have been assessed in hospitals, and these people were found to have lung inflammation akin to walking pneumonia. As we know, elite athletes are being highly monitored right now, and a number of them with asymptomatic COVID have been found to have inflammation of the heart that's concerning enough that they're being benched because they don't want to put these athletes at risk for cardiac arrest with high intensity training. And we've also seen in children with asymptomatic COVID that they've developed potentially deadly multi-system inflammatory syndrome weeks after infection. So this is a disease where asymptomatic infection doesn't always mean no damage has occurred in someone's body. Although realize that COVID is being studied much more intensively than other respiratory diseases. So really, we don't understand asymptomatic infections of influenza or the cold virus. We don't know if people who have asymptomatic infections of those respiratory diseases also get damaged. But what we do know is that the damage seems concerning enough to really provide the extra incentive not to get infected in the first place.
Well, that is scary. It's amazing what we're learning about this disease as time goes on. Kathy has a very simple question. Can Congress remove Postmaster General DeJoy? Well, Kathy, unilaterally, it'll be tough to do that. I've called on him to resign. I actually called on him to resign before the revelations about the bundling of campaign contributions. I think all that's going to be investigated, just as DeJoy's practices at USPS are going to be investigated. But I think our focus has to be on doing all we can to solve the structural issues at USPS. And that's where our focus will remain. I know that the Oversight Committee will continue to do its duty with regard to investigating some of the operational changes, as well as some of the potential campaign finance issues for Mr. DeJoy. Phyllis asks or says, demanding change in hearings are great, but nothing has changed. What can actually be done to put the post office back to what it was? Well, we need to pass a law. And that's exactly what we tried to send to the Senate. We passed the bill in the House, the Delivering for America Act, again, $25 billion for the USPS, along with a freeze on any of these operational changes that are impacting the deliveries of prescriptions and so much more. And much like the Usps Fairness Act, that is also collecting dust on Mitch McConnell's desk, although some of the funding piece was in there. Even the most recent bill that they tried to pass in the Senate, the $650 billion bill, did in fact have a $10 billion loan forgiveness for USPS. The most recent proposal that I mentioned from what's called the Problem Solvers Caucus had $15 billion. We, of course, in the HEROES Act and in my letter, bipartisan letter to leadership, asked for the full $25 billion. Anything more, Harold? Yes.
I would like to weigh in on this.
Please.
Ironically, right around the same time Mr. DeJoy took over as the Postmaster General, there was an audit report released by the Postal Service Inspector General. They audited the efficiency of the Postal Service, and they found, to no one's surprise, that the efficiency is down. And it was actually like a 33-page report. But to cut it down to make a long story short, their findings were that, as I mentioned before, the processing plants are drastically undermanned. Not only the clerks themselves, but the management. They're drastically undermanned. The post offices are drastically undermanned. That's why the mail is coming to your house later and later and later every day, sometimes after dark. On a personal note, my wife still delivers mail. She's coming home after 8 o'clock, sometimes after 9 p.m. every night. And she's not a happy camper when she gets home either. I do my best to avoid her for about an hour. But that was the finding of the Inspector General. And their solution was a simple solution. Their solution was hire and train more people. Sounds simple. Maybe not so simple, just sounds simple.
Well, please tell your wife we're grateful to her for the incredible work that she does. And I mean it, prescriptions, life-saving medication, and everything else, paychecks, everything else. So we're very grateful. Here's another medical question for you, Doctor, from Brenda. When can we get more COVID testing available? We need on-demand testing.
Wow, yeah, on-demand COVID testing is definitely an aspirational goal. In fact, for the HIV epidemic, when they had self-testing available, that really helped turn the tide of things in regards to a disease with a lot of stigma. And you can see with COVID, if you could just take that test in the morning before you're going out to interact with the public. People could, self-isolate. We could get the pandemic under control really quick. And there are some promising headway made in this area. Rapid antigen tests. They're not as good at picking up low-level infections, but they're cheap, convenient, and fast. And some companies have made progress in this and are making plans to make these tests available at a large scale, although they're initially targeting clinical settings just to increase the pace of getting results back in those settings when people need an answer as quickly as possible. In the meantime, we're kind of stuck with other testing paradigms, such as pooled testing, where you might test a group of people frequently, and instead of doing individual tests, you'll have a pooled group, and you'll decrease costs and be able to test more frequently, and thus be able to more quickly pick up infections. So there's still a lot of logistical issues before we can get widespread COVID testing, on-demand testing, but at least a lot of progress has really been made in the past months in this area.
Terrific. Well, we've been asking the administration for a national testing strategy since March, and they did, one of the bills that we passed, the additional funds that we had after the CARES Act, it required that they deliver to the Congress a national testing strategy, and what they delivered was not a national testing strategy. It was basically reiterating that the states would have responsibility, really an abdication of that federal leadership, and that simply has not worked out. And we now find ourselves in a situation where we really lack the tests and the tracing that we've needed now for many months. And we're going to keep fighting for more testing. I am encouraged by a lot of what I'm reading and seeing about the innovations. I even saw today the availability of an at-home test that might be coming soon. But I'm also concerned that people are having to pay, and in some cases significant sums, for testing and also for treatment. It's unconscionable to me that you're going to get stuck for a $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 bill for treatment for COVID-19. And it's also unbelievable to me that in the middle of this pandemic, when millions of people have been kicked off of their employer-sponsored health insurance because they no longer have a job or they've been furloughed or laid off, and many have tried to get on the ACA exchanges, that at this very moment, the Trump administration is in court trying to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and trying to dismantle with it the protection for coverage for those with pre-existing conditions, 129 million Americans. There are 47,000 in our district that rely on the ACA. So it just makes no sense in general, but particularly during this pandemic, during this public health crisis, that would continue to occur. So with that, I want to thank you both. Outstanding job answering all of our constituents' questions this week. And I want to give each of you an opportunity for a closing statement. And Harold, why don't we start with you? I want to thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for reaching out to me and allowing me to participate here. My closing statement is vote by mail. Vote by mail is safe. Follow the directions. Get that vote early. Get that vote in the mail early if you're going to vote through the mail. Your ballot, when it comes back to the post office after your postman picks it up, is actually given preferential treatment over all the other outgoing mail. The vote by mail ballots are pulled from the tubs of outgoing mail, and they're separated, and they're put in a tray, and they're giving preferential treatment. And like I said, no postage needs to be affixed to it. In fact, let me let you in on a dirty little secret from the post office. In the past, if you forgot to put a stamp on it, we delivered it anyway. So,
wow,
that just shows vote by mail is sacred. Vote by mail is sacred to the Postal Service. It's safe, it's secure. Make sure you get it out in a timely manner.
Well, Harold, I want to thank you. I think you have, 42,000 members throughout California. I want to thank all of your letter carriers for their great work during this pandemic, putting their own health and safety at risk, particularly the early months of this, being out there delivering the mail, so important. And, they really have just been incredible. And the HEROES Act is called as such because it has in there a Heroes Fund for our frontline workers, and that would certainly include those who are out there on the front lines of this, such as your members. So we thank you for joining us, and want to turn it now over to Dr. Brower for her closing thoughts.
Yeah, thanks again for inviting me, especially with this esteemed guest. It was great to hear about our votes being safe, and I'm looking forward to voting soon. In regards to COVID, I'd just like to reiterate masks. Keep activities outdoors when feasible. Remember increased hygiene practices, and really don't get discouraged. Your individual actions may seem small to you, but added up with your neighbors are really making a difference to continue to flatten the curve to avoid having us in a desperate situation where we see an exponential rise. So with this continued individual action, along with unprecedented progress being done in labs and healthcare settings throughout the country and the world, in fact, we will get over this. But I know it's tough on everybody, but don't get discouraged.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brower, for joining us again and for all your great work. I want to thank all of your colleagues at UCSD who do such an amazing job, and congrats again to UCSD for their success recently today, as a matter of fact, with the rankings for public universities. Really grateful for the partnership that we have with the community there. And I just want to thank my team. We recently had some great news that over the last close to 2 years, took office in January of 2019. We have been able to deliver for our constituents now over $1.5 million in all sorts of different things from Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits, all kinds of different things that the federal government, issues with the federal government that required our constituent casework. And I'm really, really proud of our team. And I want to encourage our viewers and listeners, if you are having any issues with the federal government, please call our office, either in Oceanside or in Dana Point. You can go on our website for all the contact information. It's just Mike Levin, one word, Mike Levin, MikeLevin.house.gov. And someone will be willing to help. And I just am so proud of the whole team. From here in DC, our great Chief Kara, our comms director Eric, who always works very hard on these town halls, our legislative staff, truly fantastic. I want to thank Jeremy, who does a great job with our videography and bring us all together for these virtual town halls, which have really been indispensable during COVID-19. And lastly, I just want to thank you for watching, for listening. I hope you stay healthy. I hope you stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.